Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 326 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk about secret leadership. And we'll think about, are you doing this sometimes? Now, secret leadership is where you basically do leadership things with your team, but you don't really tell them what you're doing and you do it by stealth. So it's an interesting approach. Let's get into this topic right now. Now, this topic of secret leadership, which is what I've coined it as, is basically a common one because what I often see is that people might go to a leadership course or they might do some leadership coaching or something like that. And then they will want to take some action with their team, like they'll want to put some goals in place or they want to try some different ways to motivate their team members. And we feel a sense of almost embarrassment sometimes when we've read a book or we've listened to a podcast or we've gone on a leadership training course and we come back and we try to implement those things in our teams. It almost seems, it's a bit embarrassing in some ways. And it's an interesting feeling to unpack. And I'll try to have a go at it right now. It's interesting because you come back, you acknowledge that you're not perfect, right? You're learning things, you're going on a leadership course. You come back and you try to apply things. And what you sometimes feel is that team members have a bit of an eye-rolling moment when they go, oh, here we go. They've gone on a leadership course. Now they're going to try to apply all their knowledge and do all this new stuff, which will be forgotten soon anyway. And that's obviously a very cynical approach. And when you get that sort of eye-rolling response, it can be tough to overcome. But this is why I think sometimes leaders try to implement things by stealth. So rather than being open and honest about what they're trying to do and achieve, they will sort of just implement things, say, hey team, this week we're going to do this new thing, but they won't really explain themselves. And it can actually come across as quite gimmicky if we start to do things with no warning or no explanation. It just looks like you've read a new leadership book and now you're going to try things out and people start to roll their eyes. So I feel like there's a little bit of embarrassment there, possibly in that you've come back, you've read something, you've realized you haven't been doing something that maybe you should have in your team, and now you're trying to put it right. And that can be a bit confronting for leaders because they're almost putting it out there that, hey, I haven't been leading as well as I could have, and now I'm going to make some changes. And so that can be embarrassing. It shows some vulnerability there. So I think that's part of the reason why people do this stealth approach rather than just being open about what they're trying to do in their team. So what are some of the things I've noticed that where this secret leadership happens? Well, it's things like motivation. So for example, if you understand a bit more about motivation theory and motivation models, you might try to implement some of that in your team so you can motivate certain team members that aren't motivated. And you might sort of introduce some of these changes by stealth without really explaining what you're doing. You're just trying to make changes and see whether that person gets more motivated. Another one could be around building better relationships or connection in your team. So a few episodes back, I talked about how to improve team connection and some really simple connection activities like showing people a recent photo on your phone and explaining a story behind it, or telling a story about your name, whatever it might be. You're trying to build those little connections within your team so that people know each other a little bit more personally, which can build connection and help people hold each other accountable over time. Now, you could do that by stealth, by just suddenly starting to run these activities in your team meetings. And that's sort of like secret leadership as well, I'd say. The other thing might be, and I notice some team leaders or managers come back and go, well, I haven't really set some of my goals are not very good in my team. I could make them more specific and measurable and that sort of thing. And they'll go back and just start to implement new goals in their team without really explaining to their team why they're doing it. But really, secret leadership is when we try to implement changes without really being open and upfront about why we're doing them. And as I mentioned, I think there's a bit of vulnerability there. We feel a little bit embarrassed or ashamed that, well, we weren't doing this thing before and we had to read a leadership book or go on a leadership course to actually change our behavior. So this is where I think it can benefit from just taking this awkwardness off the table. So what we don't want is our team going to us, eye roll, here's another leadership technique that this person's using, but they're not really telling us about it. So what I would say is, if you are trying to implement something in your team, you've come across something in a podcast or a leadership course or a book or something like that, and you're trying it in your team, I would say you don't have to keep it a secret. You're not doing things to your team. You're hopefully doing them with your team. So what I'd suggest is trying to be more open about what you're trying to do. So if you've decided, now let's say you've come across some motivation theory around a sense of purpose being really important for motivation, which is true. It's one of the important drivers of human motivation. Now, one of the things you might have heard is, well, if I help my people develop a career plan or, a development plan so they have an idea of where they want to go or how they want to develop, that can improve motivation because it builds that sense of purpose. Well, instead of doing that sort of by stealth and doing it secretly, like, okay, team, now we're going to do career development plans when we haven't done them before, it could come as a shock and seem quite strange. You could just explain to your team members that, hey, I've been doing some research and I've noticed maybe team performance isn't what it could be. And I think some of it is because we're just not really feeling that motivated. One of the things I've read about and I've learned about recently is that having sort of a sense of purpose and a career plan and career direction can really help with this, because it helps us to have a direction and something to aim for. So I'd like to start working on career development plans with you all to see whether we can help you get to where you want to go, build the right skills, all that sort of stuff. Now, you might feel that sounds sort of gimmicky still and could be a bit cringeworthy. But it's even more cringeworthy when you're not being open and honest about it, and people know what you're doing, or they think you're doing something that's sort of a leadership technique, but you're not being open about it. So this takes that awkwardness off the table. Well, actually, it puts it on the table in front of everyone and points to it, because it basically just makes it obvious what you're trying to do. You're not trying to maneuver people or manipulate people into being more motivated. You're saying, hey, this is the reason why we're doing this thing. So I think it can be really useful to just be open and honest with your intentions. And another thing you might be really open about, which I think is also useful, is being more honest and open about your own personality, which includes things like your personal values. You might have done some personality assessments or psychometric tests, for example. So one of the ones I like using with people is the print assessment. I've also got accredited recently in one called EQI 2.0, which is an emotional intelligence assessment. And sometimes it can be a really good thing to actually be open about your own personality. So you might have come across the DISC assessment too. There's lots of them around, and it doesn't really matter which one you're using. It's more about being open and honest about what drives you, where you respond well, and where you maybe things you don't like or things that sort of trigger bad behavior in you or really frustrate you. Being really open and honest about that, rather than keeping it secret and assuming people will sort of work it out. Being open and upfront. And I can tell you right now, if I ever go back into a corporate leadership role again, I will 100%, I will be explaining to my team my personality in terms of, some of my personality testing stuff that I've done, my print assessment or other assessments that I've done. And I'll be putting them on the table saying, hey, this is the conditions under which I work really well in. This is when I really get frustrated. These things really upset me. These things are where I do my best work, because it takes that guessing game off the table for your people and it helps them navigate you better. And one of the best relationships you can build is the one with your boss. And so you're making it easier for them to do that. So rather than being secret about what you like and don't like and your personality traits, I would be more open and upfront with that. It does take a little bit of vulnerability, but this is why a vulnerability can build trust. And Brené Brown does a lot of work on trust building, and she's got some great material if you want to check that out too. I'll put a link to Brené Brown's work in the show notes as well, so you can see her website and read more about vulnerability and related topics. So just in terms of guidance of how you would do this, it's fairly simple, but I would say with starting, you can have a meeting with your team or meeting one-on-one with your people. Start off with stating what you've noticed. So, okay, I've noticed that our performance isn't great, or this is happening, or that's happening. And then state why you're trying to change, like what you're trying to change about your team. So what you're trying to improve, what you're trying to change about the current situation. And then what the current changes might be. And you might also state, and I think it's a really good idea to state where you've learned this. So where you've come across the idea that this change might be positive for your team, then state your intentions, what you're trying to change based on what you've noticed. So you're really going for, you're starting with the evidence. So I've noticed this thing. Then you've got a knowledge that you've come across, that some knowledge that you've learned that you think can help with this. Then you can talk about what you're aiming for. And then obviously you can ask your team for opinions on what they think about this approach and whether they'd be willing to engage in this. And if not, why not? What's stopping them from engaging with your approach? So I think we need to stop some of this secret leadership and, treat people like adults. When you're using a leadership technique without telling anyone you're using it, sometimes it's pretty obvious you're doing it and they know it anyway. And that's where we get these eye-rolling moments. So don't make it a secret. Have an upfront conversation with people. If they think it's a stupid idea, you'll find out pretty quick because you're being open and hopefully they will be too. And you can get all that awkwardness straight out on the table without having those eye-rolling moments. So I'm interested in what you think about secret leadership. Is it something you sometimes find yourself doing? Do you feel awkward when you learn something at a course or something like that and you go back and try to implement in your team? I'm keen to hear what you think. You can whack a comment on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/326, or you can leave a comment on Spotify as well, actually, if that's where you listen. Hit me up with a comment there. I respond to all of them. So I'm really interested to see what you have to say here. And on that note, if you do like this podcast, it'd be great if you could leave a 5-star review on your app of choice. It helps me get the word out and reach more thoughtful leaders out there who might benefit from this sort of information. Thank you for listening once again. Keep up the thoughtful leadership as usual, and I'll be back next week.